Thanks, Andrew. Well, good evening. Welcome to the show. Here's what's coming up. Exclusive revelations tonight in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case against Network 10. We reveal the news Network 10 has been trying to keep secret. That scoop coming up in just a moment. The Albanese government's shame. They've released 37 sex offenders and 72 violent criminals from immigration detention. Will the minister face the sack? And are the Democrats gearing up to dump Joe Biden? Koshigata will join me to discuss. The left now compiling lists of Jews leads to the question, are we in 1930s Germany or modern Australia? I'll talk about that a bit later on the show. And just as Penny Wong slams Israel for going into Rafah, the IDF rescues 2 hostages from that very place. Nova Paris will join me a bit later. But first, I start tonight with exclusive news about the Bruce Lehrmann defamation trial against 10 and Lisa Wilkinson. We thought the next we'd hear from the judge, Justice Michael Lee, would be when he hands down his findings. But in a stunning turn of events, he's called all the major parties back to court tomorrow, including Bruce Lehrmann, Lisa Wilkinson and Channel 10. Sources close to the case tell me that Wilkinson is set to reveal the fractious history of her relationship with 10 and how they fired her from the project. It's expected that there will also be explosive revelations relating to Brittany Higgins' lawyer, Leon Zweier, and his role. This all comes after we revealed on this program that Zweier was captured on tape, claiming that he, and not a doctor, had drafted Brittany Higgins' medical report, which detailed her anxiety and suicide attempt.
Let me read you. First, so the first interview was like my statement. It was from the doctors on the 9th of October. On the Saturday night, on Sunday morning, they got us from the doctor. Very specific from you. Give me the email. Yeah, I gave him the draft. It's what I wrote.
So tonight we can exclusively reveal that Lisa Wilkinson will claim that 10 removed her as the host of the television show The Project, in effect punishing her for the fallout over the collapse of the Lehrmann criminal trial after her Logies speech, and also that 10 hung her out to dry and terminated her project contract even though the network had signed off on her speech. At the time, Wilkinson claimed she was leaving the project because toxicity from parts of the media had taken its toll on her and her family. She also indicated she was joining a crew of other high-profile women stepping back from major TV roles.
The last 6 months have not been easy, and the relentless, targeted toxicity by some sections of the media has taken a toll, not just on me, but on people I love. To Lee Sales, Tracy Grimshaw, and Carrie Bickmore, if you guys are up for a drink, I'll see you at the bar, because the margaritas are on me.
But that speech was a face-saving exercise. She'll claim it wasn't her decision to leave, that 10 removed her from the project. Instead, 10 told Wilkinson that she would conduct 6 major high-profile interviews. But more than a year later, not one has eventuated, with 10 effectively putting Lisa Wilkinson on ice. 5 months earlier, Wilkinson had won the Logie for most outstanding news coverage on the Brittany Higgins story, and she gave this famous acceptance speech.
Thank you for helping to change the national conversation, and on behalf of all of the generations of women to come, thank you, Brittany, for never giving up.
Well, that speech led to ACT Supreme Court Justice Lucy McCallum postponing the Bruce Lehrmann criminal trial. 10 sought to blame Wilkinson for the public fallout, removing her from the project and allowing her to cop the backlash personally. But in court tomorrow, 10's legal advice on Wilkinson's Logie speech is expected to be made public for the first time, with Wilkinson waiving legal privilege. Network 10 didn't want this legal advice to be public, presumably because it shows they authorised the speech. And Wilkinson's career is now in limbo. She's still employed by 10, but we can reveal that the network and its most high-profile star have been fighting for the best part of 16 months. She felt they didn't have her interests at heart. So when Bruce Lehrmann sued her, she hired her own lawyer, high-profile barrister Sue Chrysanthu, rather than rely on 10's legal team. This decision caused mayhem behind the scenes at 10. 10 objected to Sue Chrysanthu being hired because she'd acted against 10 in the past. But Sue Chrysanthu had also successfully acted for parties who sued Wilkinson's husband, Peter Fitzsimons, several times. And she even represented politician Andrew Laming against Wilkinson, among other journalists. And Wilkinson ended up having to apologise to Laming. Now, there's expected to be a lot more fascinating detail in the material tomorrow, and 10's lawyers will be cross-examined. Now, this was all meant to be a separate case about whether 10 would pay Wilkinson's legal fees, which are reportedly around $700,000. But after Justice Lee saw the documentation prepared by the parties, he formed the view that there was new evidence that was actually relevant to the main defamation case Bruce Lehrmann had brought against 10. This turn of events means that a wild brawl involving some of Australia's most prominent barristers, legal minds, law firms and media personalities may now come to light. And we're talking about some of the biggest names in the legal fraternity, including Sue Chrysanthu, now acting for Wilkinson, Leon Zweier, the well-known and highly respected Melbourne lawyer acting for Brittany Higgins, and Matt Collins, KC. Wilkinson is understood to be furious about the fact that 10 hired Matthew Collins just hours after he went on breakfast television and predicted that her Logies speech would land them in hot water. Legally protected letters usually never see the light of day, but tomorrow they may be sensationally released in yet another drama in the Brittany Higgins saga, which seems to backfire against anyone who it embroils. Now, I'm going to come back to that topic a bit later on the show. I've got legal affairs expert Chris Merritt joining me towards the end of the hour, and we're going to get stuck into what this means for the defamation trial. But in the meantime, let's turn to Parliament today and how the government has embarrassed itself. Labor released 149 immigration detainees into the wider community late last year, and in doing so, they knowingly released 7 murderers, 37 sex offenders, including child sex offenders, and 72 criminals who were charged with assault or violent robbery. The Albanese government, including Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill and Immigration Minister Andrew Giles, deliberately kept this hidden from the public. And it was only revealed today because of the hard work from Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson during Senate estimates.
And the Department of Home Affairs has admitted that there are 7 murderers, 37 sex offenders, 72 people charged with assault or armed robbery or other serious crimes like kidnapping, who are among this cohort of 149 people who the government released into the community following the High Court's decision. And among them, 18 of them have been charged already with state and territory offences. 6 of them have transgressed their requirements under their visas. So 24 of them have reoffended in the community, and not one of them has been locked up under the preventive detention scheme.
Now, to his credit, James Paterson stayed on this issue when others had moved on, and it actually played out in Parliament to devastating effect for Labor today, and it shifted the coalition's fortunes. In question time, the opposition attacked the government over and over again, and Labor was clearly on the back foot.
Can the Minister explain why he has failed to apply for a single community safety detention order?
And 10 months was the shortest period of time for an application to be made to the court under members opposite, under the regime which he and other members, including the Leader of the Opposition, who was the Minister responsible for putting in place the high-risk terror offender regime. So I think that we can see this question in that light, Speaker.
All right, joining me now, Sky News host Liz Storr and Joe Hildebrand. Welcome
Hello,
to you
Sharri,
both.
how are you?
Look, Andrew Giles' performance was so bad today, Liz, that there's wide speculation that the Prime Minister might have to sack him tomorrow. And Albanese had to go on radio this afternoon on 2GB with Chris O'Keefe to try and clean up his mess.
I mean, there's no cleaning up this mess whatsoever. The very fact that Giles thought that was a legitimate argument, you are the government, move an emergency amendment to make it less than 10 months in this particular scenario. Like James Patterson said, we've already seen 24 reoffend, but we seem to be having this catch and release happening here in Australia, like we're seeing in America, something Trump is campaigning very hard on, because people, everyday people, are just sick and tired of feeling unsafe in their own countries. And it bears mentioning this is something that we are seeing throughout the West. We're seeing it in the UK, we're seeing it in America, illegals coming to our Western countries because our countries are better than your countries, that's why you want to be here, acting out and getting absolutely nothing when they do wrong. Just last week, there was a New York cop that was beaten to a pulp by detainees who flipped the bird when they were released from court. Two of them still at large, have never been arrested. But what's the use of arresting them when they don't see any justice done? Now, we know full well if these were Australians, they would be locked up for their crimes. So what on earth is going on when, by virtue of being a former detainee or an immigrant in this country, you have these really strange rights that allow you to get away with whatever you want to in broad daylight. Even if we catch you, we release you. And we're supposed to believe that, oh, no, they're being monitored by ankle bracelets. Again today, Giles couldn't answer how many of them had been fitted with those ankle bracelets, which was just a clever farce Labor rolled out end of last year. In December, Claire O'Neill couldn't say how many of them had been fitted with ankle bracelets. And we were told that some were refusing to wear them. Well, clearly not a proper measure if you can actually opt out.
That's right.
But the issue
I refuse to go to jail, Your Honour.
Exactly.
Yes.
But the issue is that Labor and the Prime Minister made a big song and dance of passing legislation late last year, which meant they said that they'd be allowed to lock up these violent criminals back behind bars, and yet they haven't made a single application, Joe, since that legislation passed.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is in politics, you don't just have to do things, but you have to be seen to be doing them. And even if you can't do things, you need to be seen to be doing. So Labor immigration is a real Achilles heel for Labor. We've known that since day dot. And if the immigration minister himself is too dense to realise that, then he needs to go. He needs to leave the portfolio. Now, again, often immigration is a portfolio which Labor wants out of the headlines, which is perhaps why the only stories I can ever remember seeing Andrew Giles involved in have all been bad news. There was the fundraising he was doing for Dan Andrews, even though he was a federal minister. That was a bit weird. That was the first time he sort of shot to prominence. And then the second time is when more than 100 detainees walked scot-free on his watch. Now, why on earth, even if you allow for that first, either arrogant assumption that the High Court would go your way, when obviously there's a pretty obvious coin toss of a chance that it might not. Even if you were caught napping, if you're caught asleep at the wheel on that, surely you would be doing absolutely everything to reverse ferret that decision and to make sure that whatever the impediments, whatever the bureaucratic obstacles were, that you were doing everything you could to make sure that these people were being monitored, that you knew they were being monitored.
But this isn't just Andrew Giles. I mean, the Prime Minister clearly had his eye off the ball. I mean, they were all sleeping over the summer. This is a massive issue. This was a red-hot issue.
Well, the Prime Minister...
And the more senior ministers of Cabinet should have been making sure that the new laws they had were actually being used.
Well, I think the Prime Minister has to oversee every single portfolio. So you can understand, we've got a cost of living crisis. That was obviously his number one priority. And he's just got a bit of a clear air about that. And now his immigration minister is dragging him back down in the mud. This is one job Andrew Giles has, and that is to look after the immigration portfolio.
I just feel like he's being used, not defending him, he's performed atrociously, but he's clearly being used as a scapegoat by the Prime Minister. And what about the Home Affairs Minister, Claire O'Neill, as well? But let's move on to some more government incompetence today. Foreign Minister Penny Wong blundered yet again, showing her naivety on the Middle East and Israel when she came out and said that Israel moving into Rafah during its war on Hamas could have devastating consequences. And then just a short while later, news emerged that, well, Israel had actually rescued 2 hostages in Rafah, a 60-year-old and a 70-year-old. Even after this, Anthony Albanese still attacked Israel for going into Rafah on radio this afternoon. Have a quick listen.
I have very deep concerns about the idea of an Israeli military operation in Rafah. This is a place where people who've been displaced from their homes, often because their homes don't exist anymore, have been told to go to be safe. Israel must listen to the international community.
So, Liz, if it was up to Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese, oh no, we can't go to Rafah, can't rescue hostages.
Yeah, well, thank God the IDF do not take their orders from a random lady in Australia who's shown herself time and time again to be pro-Palestinian when it comes to the issue of this war. But what never gets enough credence on the world stage and from mainstream media is the forensic accuracy in which the IDF carry out these operations. So we know that two hostages who have been in, I mean, how many months has it been now, that they have been rescued, no loss of life that we're currently aware of. The same was true of the West Bank, the hospital in the West Bank just last month. They could have bombed the hospital to smithereens and said, well, Hamas fighters were using it as a sanctuary. They could have gone in there and opened fire on every Tom, Dick and Harry. No, they went in, popped 3 Hamas fighters and left. That is incredible. There is not many intelligence agencies who are capable of pulling off something like that. And then people still want to parade them around as if they're the butchers. They get in there, they get the job done, and they leave. On both accounts, no civilian lives were lost whatsoever.
We hear far more criticism of Israel from Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese than we do criticism of Hamas.
Insane.
Now, Barnaby Joyce has today apologised for a video showing him rolling around on the street swearing. I'm sure you've seen it by now. He's now claiming that his prescription medication, and we're not sure what it's for, reacted with alcohol.
I'm on a prescription drug, and they say certain things may happen to you if you drink, and they were absolutely 100% right. They did. I'm not looking for sympathy, and I'm not looking for an excuse. I'll just stand by that. What I said is what I said. I came back, I sat on a planter box, I fell off, and I was videotaped. There you go.
Joe, Barnaby Joyce now has 6 children.
Yep.
I mean, he's embarrassing his poor kids as well as himself with this behaviour.
Oh, look, maybe his kids would be a bit embarrassed, but again, I don't really have much of a problem with this. I mean, obviously, Barnaby was falling down drunk. I think most Australians have been there at some point in their lives. He's a high-profile figure, and of course, someone thought they'd film it and send it to the Daily Mail instead of helping him. And, you know, as a journo, thank you. But look, I just don't see how this is a hanging offence. It's, you know, people are trying to compare it to Lydia Thorpe just have rocks in their heads.
It's a hanging offence, though.
No, people are saying, oh, but the PM, you know, wasn't as mean to Barnaby as he was to Lydia Thorpe. He didn't go and abuse any other people. He didn't run around a strip club saying you stole my land and telling people they had tiny penises. He was just someone who clearly had too much to drink. I don't know how much prescription medicine he'd had, but it would have been, I think, a few litres. And, you know, just leave the bloke alone.
Why don't these politicians ever grow up?
Look, he knew he was on prescription meds, so there's absolutely no excuse for getting blind drunk, and nobody's saying you can't get blind drunk. Just don't do it in Canberra. This is a place of business. This is where we fly our pollies from all over Australia to do business, and if you can't keep it together for just 4 sitting days, yes, they're there on our dime. It's just unacceptable. I love him. He's a very lovable guy, but he's shown time and time again when it comes to his personal life, he has very poor judgment. Just know, I'm on prescription meds right now. I can't be downing this much alcohol. It's not going to end well. And the reason why he was still lying there was not because, oh, I fell off a planter. You clearly couldn't have gotten up at that moment, pal. Otherwise, you would have helped yourself up.
Yeah, I mean, we all know.
He's
of course,
we
all know it was 3 sheets that win. I don't know how much I buy the prescription medicine thing. It seems to be the sort of tried and true thing. Everyone's on prescription medicine every time they get into an alcohol-related scandal. But again, I love have a drink. I'm on prescription meds. I'm pretty sure I haven't lost a fight with the planner box yet.
You're from the fine tradition of tabloid journalism, so
that's right.
That's why that image isn't so shocking to you, because you would have seen it a lot of times back in the day at the Telegraph.
Very, very true. But I actually think this helps Barnaby. I think it makes him more relatable, even after I'm a good Catholic boy, so even after the marriage breakdown, much as I know Vicky, she's an ex-colleague of mine, a friend of mine, but I thought that was really awful for his previous family, his ex-wife and their 4 kids.
Absolutely.
But even after that, he was still rewarded by the electorate. He still got up.
Well, it's a sad indictment on society
of
doing
his job as the deputy prime.
No, but the voters still loved him. Like in New England,
I just think it's a sad indictment on society of doing these rather immoral things. Then actually is supposedly, oh look, it made him even popular. I don't buy that for a second. I think he's popular because he talks a lot of common sense. He's a breath of fresh air in that stagnant place.
Reminds me of when Kevin Rudd went to the strip club, and that actually helped him. He was so worried about that scandal. Anyway, we're out of time. Liz Storer, we'll see you at 10 o'clock tonight. Joe Hildebrand, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Cheers.
Now, the biggest story in the United States right now is the pressure on Joe Biden to resign and make way for a new nominee. You would have heard by now that Biden won't be charged over the classified documents scandal because a jury would believe him to be a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Special counsel Robert Hur's report was shocking for Biden. It found he had diminished faculties, that his memory was significantly limited, and it claimed that Biden couldn't remember the years that he was vice president or even when his son Beau died. He's too mentally impaired to stand trial. Well, that's what the report found, and yet he's still fit to be president of the United States, the most important role in the world. Well, Biden held a press conference to react to this report to try and reassure the public that he was perfectly capable of being president, but then he confused the president of Egypt with Mexico.
Initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
So scared is Biden and his team of another gaffe like this, they turned down the traditional pre-Super Bowl interview with access to some 115 million people and instead ran with this.
The Super Bowl is Sunday. If you're anything like me, you like to be surrounded by a snack or two while watching the big game. You know, when buying snacks for the game, you might have noticed one thing. Sports drinks bottles are smaller. A bag of chips has fewer chips, but they're still charging you just as much. And as an ice cream lover, what makes me the most angry is that ice cream cartons have actually shrunk in size, but not in price. I've had enough of what they call shrinkflation.
Well, Donald Trump responded to this today. Here's what he had to say. Sorry, we'll bring that comment to you a bit later. Now, the left media are finally starting to report on the concerns about Biden, his memory and his age. The question is the Democratic Party actually going to move him on for someone who has a chance at becoming president? Joining me now, Sky News contributor Kosha Garda. Kosha, thank you so much for your time. Look, how do you think this will unfold now within the Democratic Party? Because it seriously is the first time that the Washington Post, CNN, the left media are starting to discuss this issue in a prominent way.
It sure is, Sharri. I think this is a central question facing U.S. politics right now, and it's really hard to know how it's going to unfold. I say there's two scenarios. You know, one scenario is they stay the course, all this notwithstanding about President Biden, and they just rely on Trump's weaknesses, if he is the front runner as we expect him to be, as well as just the power of the Democrat machine and their ability to turn out the vote, since our elections are about turnout, getting him over the finish line. The other scenario is that they pull a switcheroo, and they would probably do it at the Democrat convention in August, where they sort of would parachute somebody in, and therefore they avoid the mudslinging that would happen in a primary and just parachute somebody in.
Isn't that far too late?
Kamala Harris or...
But isn't that far too late? It's not giving someone a chance to campaign?
It is, and the Democrats don't like to campaign, we've seen that before, where they don't like to have primaries and competition to their peril, and I think to the detriment of their voter base. But that seems to be what they're marching towards, so that they can sidestep the mudslinging on their side and just have somebody kind of crowned that can go after Trump in the general. And then it's anybody's guess whether it's Michelle Obama or Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or somebody else.
I think what's so shocking is that you have an almost identical offence, and I know people are pointing out differences here and there between the classified document scandal for each Trump and Biden, but realistically, it is an identical offence. Classified documents where they shouldn't have been, and yet you're seeing completely different treatment for two figures, one Democrat and one Republican. You can't help but come to the conclusion that this is politicised.
I think you're right, and I think that's what most of the American electorate sees, for sure, except for the diehards who, may not see it in that way. But even independents, certainly the Republican base, see that. I think that's why you see Trump's polling go up 5 points with every indictment, as he jokes on the stump. And that's why, because people see it, whether it's right now, him versus Biden, or the famous Hillary Clinton scandal where she had classified information on her server and deleted 33,000 emails and all of that. People don't forget that, and I think it's sad, but I think that's where we are in terms of the lack of trust in these institutions as well.
Look, just finally, Donald Trump has suggested that he would encourage Russia to attack NATO allies who don't contribute enough to the alliance. I just don't understand why he would say that in this comment.
I think that's Trump, where he likes to have rhetoric wrapped around a kernel of truth and what he's going for. He made a big thing about other countries not paying their fair share in NATO in his first term. That's something he talked a lot about. I think he's just, that's Trump being Trump and putting bluster in there to drive headlines and drive attention to that point that if he's back in there, he's going to make the rest of the NATO members pay their fair share. And he wanted to throw Putin in there to kind of drive the oxygen in the news cycle, I think.
Yeah, completely weird comments. Kosha Gada, thank you so much for joining me. Now, still to come, Nova Peris will be on live to speak about the latest shocking example of Jews in Australia being targeted and vilified in lists like it's the 1930s. Plus, coming up in the show, a top legal mind breaks down what my Lisa Wilkinson revelations mean for the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case. That's after this quick break. Welcome back. Well, ever since Hamas launched terror attacks on Israel, anti-Semitism in Australia has been inexplicably exploding. We've been sadly documenting it night after night on this program. Well, now a list of more than 600 Jews has been compiled and is being shared online. A list of Jews. This has led to our fellow Australians receiving death threats, not being able to go to their work just because we're Jewish. A Palestinian activist even threatened a 5-year-old child, and their parents have gone into hiding and had to move their business to an area of Melbourne that has more Jews. This is incredibly distressing. That terror attacks would spark a global wave of anti-Semitism and that it would take hold in Australia, with lists of Jews being compiled and shared proudly, by the way, by racist social media activists. The last time lists of Jews circulated was in the 1930s in Nazi Germany, when Nazis used paper records to identify Jews, to round them up and kill them during the Holocaust. I grew up being told never to put my religion down on the census form so that no one at any future time would know who was Jewish and who wasn't, in case Jew hatred arose once again. It's astonishing that this is the world we're now living in. This, and it's called doxing, the outing of Jews for no reason other than religion, is causing anguish in the Jewish community. Well, feminist Mia Friedman wrote a brilliant piece about this on the weekend. She wrote that generational trauma runs deep in the veins of every Jewish person in the world. We all lost family members in the Holocaust, murdered by Nazis whose mission was to exterminate the Jews. She wrote, what's confusing is that this new wave of anti-Semitism isn't coming from Nazis or the far right, it's coming from the left, including many individuals who hold significant power and influence in sections of our culture and who have hundreds of thousands of followers they can unleash against anyone they choose to target. And they are currently targeting Jewish people. They're powerful words. Well, one of those who shared the link online is the fraudulent feminist Clementine Ford. She shared a link on social media to her 250,000 followers. And yet, she is still performing at the Opera House on the 10th of March. How can someone sharing a racist list of Jews be celebrated at the Opera House as part of a festival celebrating women? Why doesn't anyone care about racism towards Jews? Now, I'm not suggesting we should completely cancel anyone, but those who are sharing lists of Jews online shouldn't be celebrated on the stage of the Opera House. This is condoning racism. This is turning a blind eye to those causing incredible pain to a section of the Australian community. It's endorsing fear, intimidation, and persecution. Leaders in our community, from politicians to festival organisers, need to show leadership on anti-Semitism. It is now dire. Well, one person who has shown leadership is former Labor Senator and Olympian Nova Peris, and she joins me now. Nova, welcome to the program once again. Thank you so much for your advocacy on behalf of our community. Look, what do you think is happening when we're seeing lists of Jews being shared and it goes viral globally?
Yeah, it is. Firstly, I want to say sorry for your community. I feel your pain and your anguish, and it's not right. And I just want to draw a comparison, if I can, in any way, that I was racially vilified a number of years ago. And the guy who racially vilified me was subjected to an 8 months suspended jail sentence. And he hurt me with words via the internet. Now, what's happened to the 600 Jewish people and their families is inexcusable. And if this is illegal to have occurred, the sharing of information and private information, this is inciting racial hatred, it's inciting pain and violence to your community, and harsh measures should be, and I would call for a prison sentence. If I can be racially vilified and the guy who racially vilified me gets 8 months suspended just through words, he wasn't aiming to hurt me in any other way apart from words. This is very dangerous.
I mean, it seems like the law's already there. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Nova.
Yeah.
So it seems like the laws are already there, but they're not being applied when it comes to the Jewish community. I saw that the Prime Minister this afternoon in a radio interview on 2GB indicated that he might ask his Attorney General to consider whether tougher laws are needed, but it just seems like across the board, when you look at the Opera House protest or you know, whatever it is, that the hate preachers, we do have laws that are in place, but no one's using them.
You need leadership. Leadership is the only way you can make change. And if we want to keep this country a great country, we can't allow ourselves to diminish to a country where a cohort of incredible Australians are being hurt in this capacity, and to sit back and say nothing is not right. And for me, as an Aboriginal Australian, I know what the Jewish community have done for my people. So it's very easy for me to stand on the right side of history with your people, because, you know, it's not right what's happening. And, you know, if we go back to what happened on the October 9th, before any retaliation happened, you know, I look back at the massacres that have occurred for Aboriginal people since colonisation, and to my knowledge, never in one single massacre has there been 1,200 people. You know, that was the most brutal massacre, and we allowed, people stood back and watched what happened on October the 9th. Is just insane in this country, and it's un-Australian. And for those cohort of people to do what they did to your community on our national icon, the the Opera House. The Opera House is like the Uluru. You know, it's an international icon. They spat in the face of all Australians. It is totally un-Australian, and we can't keep making excuses of why we can't get tougher on what's happening to the community now.
Such strong words. Nova, your comments, you did a video last week on social media where you explained how people are wrong, and a lot of Palestinian activists are doing this. They're trying to say their cause is the same as Indigenous Australians fighting in Australia. And you produced a video that went viral. Let's play a little snippet of it now if we can.
In recent times, we've heard a lot in our national discourse in Australia about truth-telling, and it has mostly been in the context of my own people. I am saddened to see our sacred Aboriginal flag, a flag which I fought so hard to be returned to the Aboriginal community, being misappropriated by Palestinian anti-Israel and anti-Jewish groups in Australia. Who gave outright free, prior and informed consent to use our flag for your cause? The Jewish people in Australia have been the most committed friends and allies of my people for decades, and I absolutely refuse to stand by and let anyone deny these truths.
Such a powerful video. How ignorant are the Palestinian activists trying to claim that they share the same cause as Indigenous Australians when Jews are Indigenous to the land of Israel?
Yep, and truth matters. And over the years, with all sitting down with elders in our community, truth is fundamental to progress in this country. So I know the history. And for the last 50 years of my time on this continent, I have never in my time seen a January 26th march where Palestinian people have somehow joined in the cause. You know, they've marched and they've...
It's a new trend.
It's a new trend. You know, they hijacked our day, where I see January 26 is like the Anzac Day. We acknowledge the fallen soldiers. We acknowledge the blood of our ancestors. We acknowledge the strength and the resilience, but also the survival. And for Aboriginal people, our elders, we're not trying to hurt anyone here in this continent. We've worked so hard for reconciliation and for peace going forward. You know, we want this country to be good and safe for our future generations. So for me, doing that video was so fundamental to the core of who I am as an Aboriginal person, because we lived under the...
And you've had backlash and negative reaction to that video.
I have. You know, if people have attacked me, I've been attacked most of my life. You stick your head out, you're going to expect people to sort of come at you. But hand on my heart, I know at the Jewish community, you have people like your Ron Castens, who devoted 40 years of his life, the Jeff Schurz, who in the 1970s sat on Mother Earth with my people to understand and write the archaeological evidence of our existence to this continent. So we can't deny your truth. And your truth is that it's archaeologically proven that you have connection to Israel and have done for over 3,000 years. You know, it's not a new thing since 1948. You know, you've never ceded your sovereignty to your country. We've never ceded sovereignty to ours. And I know in the Jewish community, we just want to live peacefully. You know,
absolutely.
That's what we want to do. And so
exactly.
I'm happy I've done what I've done, and I will stand with your community knowing the truth.
Thank you, Nova, and I'm so sorry you've had such horrible backlash to it. I'm sure it has been intense, because I know how intense those activists can be. So thank you so much for your courage, for standing strong. We all really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, coming up after the break, the Greens threaten to stall Labor's housing bill, effectively holding them to ransom. And all is not going well for The Guardian's Catherine Murphy in her new role advising Albanese. That's after this. Welcome back. Well, I'm joined now by two political insiders, the director at GXO Strategies and Bill Shorten's former Chief of Staff, Cameron Milner, and Director of Headline Advisory, Andrew Carswell, Scott Morrison's former Press Secretary. Welcome to you both. Look, let's start with this story in The Australian today about the former Guardian political editor. It was her first week as media advisor to Anthony Albanese last week, and she's apparently already ruffling feathers and speaking out of turn in meetings, according to The Australian, at a joint Senate Tactics Committee hearing that was chaired by Penny Wong. Catherine Murphy spoke out. Now, Cameron Milner, you've got the inside word on what happened at this meeting. What can you tell us?
Well, Catherine Murphy obviously was a scribe of choice for the Albanese group, and she wrote lots of puff pieces about him. But now the tables have turned because the familiarity she had with them when she was in the press gallery is not to be taken lightly when she's a staffer on the other side of the table. So Murphy thought she had the invitation to speak. Madam Wong gave her the death stare when she spoke out of turn. And not only did she do it in the Senate tactics, I can tell you she also did in the House tactics as well last week. So Murphy was making her presence well and truly known.
And do you have any detail about what unfolded at the House tactics or who was annoyed? Is there anything else you can tell us?
Well, she took on ministers, which is just not what you do as a staff member, and certainly not as the Prime Minister's representative. My only defence of Murphy is she's on $250,000 a year, so that's $5,000 a week. I guess for that she thinks she needs to be heard. That's the only defence I can think of, because it's not what you do on tactics committees when you're the staffer, when it's actually the Minister's prerogative to speak.
Yeah. Andrew Carswell, I think it's interesting that at The Guardian they've effectively replaced one Albanese staffer with another Albanese biographer in Karen Middleton.
Yeah, I found that deeply surprising today, Sharri, I must admit. But just on this, just on this Catherine Murphy story, I think it's a vastly different environment you're going into as a journo. So there's a little bit of grace there. There are appropriate and inappropriate times to be giving your advice in these kind of meetings. And it very much depends on the context and what's being discussed. If what's being discussed has an external risk factor to it, then by all means speak up. And the PM should be actually empowering his staff to speak up as long as they hold their lanes. If they're talking about policy, then it crosses over the lines. But if it's in their lanes, by all means speak, and you should have that empowerment from the PM himself. But what this says to me is it's not the fact that Catherine Murphy spoke up once or twice. It's the fact that you've got ministers here that are shocked by that, are appalled by that,
leaking about it.
That says everything about the way. That says everything about the way the government has handled communications in the last 18 months. They've been terrible at it. Maybe they should actually listen to their communications advisors.
And of course, Carswell, you had a similar experience. You were Chief of Staff at the Daily Telegraph and then went to work for the Coalition. Now, I just want to talk about how the government's going at the moment, because Albanese was trying to get back on his feet after the broken promise on the tax cuts. He was looking confident last week. They were starting to feel a bit arrogant that they could get away with a broken promise. But then those devastating revelations today about the immigration scandal. Cameron Milner, how do you think this is going? And shouldn't the Prime Minister have paid closer attention to whether the new laws were being applied? It looks like he's using Andrew Giles as a scapegoat.
Well, this is Groundhog Day, back to the very worst of the last 2 weeks of the last Parliament last year, which is what was contributing to Albo's terrible numbers. So it's terrible deja vu. And wouldn't you have thought that maybe over the Christmas break they could have squared this one away? No. I mean, we've got terrible, terrible people out there in the community because the laws aren't doing the job they're supposed to be doing. And Minister Giles and Prime Minister Albanese, it's on their watch this is happening.
Andrew, this is a really devastating, critical issue that is biting for Labor. The news that there are so many violent criminals out in the streets, the news that even though they've got these laws that could allow some of these criminals to be detained again, Labor hasn't even put in an application for one criminal.
Yeah, Sharri, I gave the Coalition a bit of a clip for their tactics last week, but they had it spot on today because they returned to an issue that really resonates with the public. They were in a hiding to nothing talking about tax last week. They were defeated on that, and they rightfully moved on to this issue because this issue really sits at the heart of competence in government. So you've got a government now that was poor on the rollout of the campaign on The Voice. You had a government that was poor on dealing with this critical issue on immigration. So it brings up in people's minds that the incompetence of government. Forget about the trust, forget about the broken promise on tax stuff. This stuff is more important. This stuff really resonates with voters because it goes to the competency of government.
Look, there's new polling just ahead of the crucial by-election in Dunkley that shows the stage 3 tax cuts, this broken promise, was overwhelmingly received well by the voters there. Cameron, does this indicate that Labor might do better in Dunkley than they would have done before this announcement?
Absolutely, because if you look at Albo's numbers beforehand, before Christmas, they were tanking, they were heading south. He's put a floor under those by breaking a solemn promise to the electorate. And obviously people want a tax cut, which is why Peter Dutton did the right thing and supported the tax cut too. But you're right, I mean, Dunkley was the reason why they brought forward these tax cuts, and it might just be the reason why Dunkley's saved for Labor in 4 weeks' time.
All right. Cameron Milner, Andrew Carswell, thank you both so much for your time tonight. Now, after the break, we return to our top exclusive story, those revelations in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case against Network 10. It's set to be a big story tomorrow. Stay tuned. We'll talk about it after the break. Welcome back. Well, at the start of the show, we revealed exclusively that sources close to the case tell me that Lisa Wilkinson will tomorrow reveal the fractious history of her relationship with Channel 10 and how they fired her from the project. In court tomorrow, this is going to all unfold, how 10 removed Wilkinson as the host of the television show The Project, in effect punishing her for the fallout over the collapse of the Lehrmann criminal trial after her Logies speech. They hung her out to dry, terminated her project contract, even though the network had signed off on her speech. Now, let's bring in now legal affairs contributor for The Australian and Vice President of the Rule of Law Institute of Australia, Chris Merritt. Thank you for joining me. Look, this is going to be explosive tomorrow with Justice Michael Lee's decision to recall all the main players.
Yes, it's a stunning decision, and we now know why it happened. It seems pretty clear that the judge last year gave an indication that he was not prepared to believe that any lawyer could advise any television presenter or journalist to make a speech of the sort that Lisa Wilkinson made when she accepted the Logies. He just wasn't prepared to believe that a rational solicitor could provide such advice. Now, that was an open invitation to someone, and it looks like Lisa Wilkinson has done it, to provide that legal advice. Now, that's what seems to be in the affidavits that's going to be argued out in court. But this has got, the implications of this are immense. The first issue will be who gets to waive legal professional privilege, who gets to waive confidentiality over legal advice. Remember, this was legal advice provided to a client, i.e. the 10 network. And the issue is, should that advice be waived by the client, i.e. 10, or by a disgruntled employee of the client, i.e. Lisa Wilkinson? So that's issue number one. But the big issue will be whether it is reasonable, and this goes to the defence that Lisa Wilkinson is running, whether it's reasonable for an experienced journalist who's been an editor of 3 magazines at last count, I think, to say, well, look, I made this speech on the advice of lawyers. It was approved by management. It will be very interesting to see what the judge makes of that, whether it's reasonable for any journalist or television presenter to effectively plead ignorance of the presumption of innocence. Remember, this speech was made in the run-up to criminal proceedings. It will be a very interesting hearing tomorrow. No, it certainly is. It's going to be explosive. Look, we never usually see legally protected letters. They never make the light of day, but we may see some quite sensational documents emerge tomorrow. We're going to report them right here on this program. If you happen to miss my editorial from the start of the show, look it up on the Sky News website. We had that big exclusive earlier on. Chris Merritt, really appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you so much. Quite okay.
Now, we'll be back here 8 o'clock tomorrow night. As I said, it's going to be a big day in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation trial. We'll have all the news here. That's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for your company. And right now, here's the great Paul Murray.